ADHD reWired, episode 472. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD reWired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free and secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups. Learn all about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups. You can co-work with us in our Adult Study Hall virtual membership community. You can do all of these things by going to our website at ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD reWired. Today's guest is Ian Siegel. Ian has been doing test prep and college consulting for a decade. In that time, he's delivered some of the highest improvements on the SAT and ACT in the country and has helped over 90% of the students he worked with get into their top choice colleges. He is the author of School Sucks, Your Child Doesn't, The Secret to Unlocking Your Child's Untapped Potential. What a great title. Where he details his philosophy and illustrates the overlooked reality that every leader, thinker, and doer has had an expert tutor or mentor. Ian, welcome to the podcast.
Eric, thanks so much for having me.
We're going to talk about learning as adult learners and why some of the smartest people happen to also be some of the worst learners.
Yes, exactly. I know this is kind of, I want to frame it in a more positive light. I think that maybe another way of saying it is that brilliance comes with baggage. And I think that people I think in this society where we're all about outputs and getting things done and all of that, we kind of overlook the reality that we really need to treat ourselves according to who we are. And if you're a sensitive person and you are broadly sensitive to your environment in all types of ways, then things that are stressful can really impede your kind of learning state. It kind of has these like implications that are just beyond even the moment of being distracted. It's kind of what I've noticed working with students, but then I turn it around and see it in everyone. But it is just that there's these kind of personalities that are created around these cognitive realities at a kind of almost formulaic level. And my hope is what I try to do with my students and, my employees and myself is to get us out of those kind of negative self-talk. And I don't even mean, it's a negative cycle, but it's not necessarily negative self-talk all the time. It's a specific kind of narrative that we tell ourselves that often kind of just goes with a cognitive reality. So what I notice is that, because I end up, and this happens with a lot of tutors who really experience, is that you end up working with some of the brightest. And those bright kids have bright parents too. And all of them, it's a different set of skills and challenges that you're encountering when you're working with these students, and they're largely emotional. And those become the learning disabilities that I notice the most, that are like the kind of the most challenging. And I would say the most problematic. One is anxiety, two is ADHD, and then three is actually depression is actually like not as bad in some ways, as long as the depression doesn't get too bad. But that just systematically watching parents and students and my employees and who can learn, it's really kind of understanding. And that's why I appreciate about your podcast so much is the kind of the self-knowledge that you guys celebrate. It's so important as a starting point to actually learn at your pace as a learner.
So did you get into this work through kind of your own kind of learning journey?
Yeah, definitely. I think, one thing that I was joking around with one of my tutors yesterday was that I was like, how psychologists and therapists, they end up doing that because they want to heal themselves. They need the therapy. And I'm like looking at all these teachers and tutors and I'm like, you guys suck at learning. That's why you're here, to learn again. You're not knowing it consciously, but on a subconscious level. And I'm like, because I'm like trying to like help these tutors change behaviors, integrate what they learn. And it is like, whoa, I mean, yes, intuitive, and they have this like incredible bandwidth starting out in life, right? And how quick they're able to pick things up. But then they hit that wall, that wall that a lot of people hit a lot earlier in life, a learning experience. And they're like, oh my, what is this? Holy, like, and then there's defense mechanism, defense mechanism, defense mechanism. And I say all that because I'm like the guiltiest one. I know because through my own experience. So I grew up in DC. I went to this very challenging all boys school called St. Anselm's. No one's heard of it. It's highest average of AP scores of any school in the DC area. All complete nerds.
Sounds like an anxiety, just like cesspool.
So you think that, but the fact that everybody was no girls, extremely nerdy, and kind of this, I don't know, there was that, it was less than, it wasn't the normal thing. Actually, it was very unusual. So I was really lucky to have this experience. And it was an incredible school, and you think but I was ADHD out the wazoo this whole time, not really kind of pushing myself beyond what I was capable of, and not really recognizing that about myself. But I'm like, smart enough that I'm keep getting by with A's, end up at Vanderbilt, and then, continuing on to like work tutor in Silicon Valley for this hyped up, very fancy education consulting company, which is just a tutoring company and college counseling stuff, but education consulting because it's Silicon Valley clients. And the whole time, I just sucked as a learner. Like, I'm not really actively seeking out the unknown. I'm like just judging myself about what I already know. And I talk about this in my book. So I end up being one of the highest, higher build at first kind of reading and writing tutors on the SAT and everything. And then also kind of like other admissions tests, and then kind of building up to that because I was that guy. That's what I did at Vanderbilt. Very, very good at math and reading, both no problem. But I just decided, I went that direction. Anyway, end up being matched with this 7-year-old Chinese kid who's a genius, basically. So I didn't really believe it going into it, but his dad saying, no, like, I have like IQ of this. I went to Harvard. Summa cum laude. I mean, saying all this stuff, which I'm like, first of all, EQ wise, I'm like, I don't know about someone who would just say all that stuff, but so like doubting because, I have a little bit more EQ than that. And I'm kind of realizing, okay, autism spectrum, something's going on here. But when I'm introduced to this kid, let's call him Chen, he's everything that his dad said and more. Like, I mean, if you ever seen Good Will Hunting, that scene where what's his name? The actor Jason Bourne, Matt Damon. Matt Damon. Thank you. Anyway, I'm matched with Chen, and I'm a newer tutor, newer coach, right? And I'm like, very puffing up my chest about, I was a literature major and at Vanderbilt, being on the lowest pole of the totem pole, in the sense that the lowest part of the totem pole, in the sense that like all the other tutors went to Stanford. So I'm like, in the Silicon Valley hyper competitive way, it's just a Vanderbilt tutor. So I had to really like carry my own and all that stuff. So this kid is just, okay, he's 7 years old. He's reading a book that's on an 8th grade level. His English is his second language. And I mean, flying. Anytime he didn't know a word, he looked it up immediately in his Kindle. He logged it in his brain, like without question. I'd never see kids do this, never. And it just became part of them. And I asked him about the words later, and he always knew them, and he was using them in the future, like that. And I was like, oh my God, I was so like, oh my God, I can't believe this, the pace that he's just like learning. And I'm like, I'm barely helping. I'm just like watching this kid do something amazing. So we switched gears to doing New York Times, like op-ed stuff. So we'd read, because it's challenging to find something that is challenging for this kid, but also not inappropriate at the same time. He's 7 years old.
Oh, it's so like, my son, he's on the spectrum, he's ADHD and he's highly gifted, and he was reading at 1 year old. Like his asynchronous development, where he could read the pages, but his fine motor was so poor he couldn't turn the pages.
Wow. I mean, see, your son's another great example of just like these kids are incredible. I mean, and that's the thing. And like, I mean, this is part of the kind of the takeaway of the story. It's like learning from tutoring. I mean, like you just see someone else's brain and you're like, wow.
Because he starts reading these books, and I'll sometimes take a little bit of a look at what he's reading, and occasionally I'm like, buddy, like this is not appropriate. Like I was like, oh man, he's been reading this thing. It's called SPC, I think it's called. It's like this weird, like sci-fi, basically manual of like
Wow.
all these obscure items that have like, and his books like he has it on the Kindle, but it's like thousands of pages, and like
Wow.
all the stuff is like it doesn't make really any sense to me. I'm like, I don't get the point of this, but he loves it because it all has like a number to it, and he loves numbers. I think it was my niece who was actually was over, and my son was showing it to her, and then she goes, Uncle Eric, you might want to actually look at what he's reading, and I was like, oh, yeah, we're not going to be reading this anymore.
It's a tough show. I mean, it's tough, and those kids are tough to find the right thing for them because you want to keep them engaged, and then you don't want to open their. I mean, like two. I mean, come
Right.
on, there's a lot there.
Oh
So
yeah.
absolutely, and I mean, and it's crazy how there's a lot of kids. There are a lot of kids like that in Silicon Valley. I mean, I was just off the top of my head, I was thinking of another kid who's just like hyperlexia, like just
Mhm.
reading like constantly, and also the ability to just like rattle back the book word for word,
Yeah.
verbatim. Yeah, I'm like, okay, I started to have some like gather the humility that started to help me become a better learner. But the kicker was this: we were going back and forth. We were taking sides about. There happened to be a very kind of an accessible article, at least for him. I thought it was kind of strange because he's like his cultural context is Shanghai, but he was like picking up that we were reading this argument about this debate between two writers around should homeschool students be able to play on sports teams for their local public high school. I mean, he was like intuiting, like the context, this is social context, and not even, just the like the actual words on the page. And I felt like he was beating me in the argument. And but the thing that was along the way, there was a word, and I don't know if it was this article or another one, but it was flank. And unlike Chen, spent my life not looking up words, relying on context clues, focusing on, okay, I pretty much got this. So like I gathered from like Braveheart, I thought of like a flank attack. I thought it was from behind, but it's from the side. So Genius Chen's genius father walks by, hears me say flank is from behind, and that look that he cast over his shoulder, and he says, Chen, flank is from the side. The session ended quickly, not quickly thereafter, but they started to kind of back up, and our tutoring sessions became increasingly inconvenient. And it started to dawn on me kind of like what had happened, because like at first I was like very defensive. I was thinking, oh, like, well, this someone's on the autism spectrum. They don't really understand that like this is okay and all that. But the reality is it was a tip of an iceberg moment.
Mm.
At that moment, he knew I couldn't help his son because I hadn't been like the learner that I could have been. And so I wasn't really modeling anything great for his kid, who was an incredible learner at age 7. And honestly, it's like the thing is like, that's not such a big deal. Kids start off as incredible learners. And I just noticed that like what this kid had was this kind of like that circular process of learning, of seeing, reconciling, integrating, and then that integration expanding the radius with which he saw the world. And I was realizing, shit, I haven't been doing that at all.
Mm.
Like hardly at all. And I think like the interesting thing is that he's able to do that. And he's on the autism spectrum, which I think is that's a serious learning disability, because the reality is if you have the EQ and the IQ, that should be like a superpower. But what I see instead is the EQ becomes a disability because you start worrying about the social stuff of everything. This kid's not worrying about anything. He's like, let me learn. And I'm sure your son may be like more along those lines. But the reality is the people who have the most EQ are the ones who have the best capacity to think from other people's perspectives.
And just in
And
case people aren't familiar with EQ, it's emotional intelligence.
sorry, emotional intelligence, absolutely, and the emotional quotient or whatever, yeah. And I think that like that's the kicker for so many people, is that like we're not realizing we're putting in all these strategies and all this stuff, but like the idea is that like reality comes from an intersection of different perceptual sources. Like you're integrating that. So I'd love to dig into this a little bit deeper, but it's
Yeah,
some exciting stuff.
let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm looking forward to kind of getting into, especially the mind of the bright, even gifted adult learner, and how sometimes the giftedness can make learning a real challenge. So we will be right back.
Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our award-winning, intensive, online coaching and accountability groups. And support on your ADHD journey can start at coachingrewired.com. Our 32nd season of coaching groups is just around the corner, and there is still time for you to join. That's coachingrewired.com to check out the schedules for our 5 sections that are available for our upcoming spring season, and to get started on your pre-registration process to join us for our next registration event this week on Thursday, March 9th at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. If you're done with feelings of overwhelm and ready to get unstuck, want to set better boundaries, learn ADHD-friendly ways to gain momentum on your biggest goals, and are willing to participate and put in the work while engaging alongside other like-minded brains who just get it, then this is the group that you've been looking for. Whether you're new to ADHD Rewired or you've been a longtime listener and are on the fence about your decision to join us, here's what some listeners, like you, shared with us after being a part of our coaching groups.
I decided to join the group both as like a proxy to kind of move forward in my professional transition, as well as try a different approach to productivity and whatnot.
I decided to join this group because I was diagnosed really late at 39, and mostly just to learn more about ADHD as a initial learning resource.
I felt like I had hit sort of a low. I was really not thriving at work sufficiently, although I was taking on more and more responsibility and was really burning myself out.
It's so mind-boggling to me that I feel like we're all let in on a secret that no one else seems to know or to think about. It may just happen to them naturally, like planning or executive function or whatever, but to me, just like having that and carrying that around like makes me feel not only motivated, but that even though you may struggle, you can tackle anything and do hard things.
I learned a lot of the things I do in my life are coping mechanisms, and there are better ways to get around it. With medication was super helpful, but just being able to talk to my peers and find out like, oh, these are also problems that other people have, and it's not just me being lazy or unmotivated, has been incredibly helpful, to the point where my A team we've already got plans for meeting regularly well into the future.
Moments that were most meaningful were hearing the other group members' stories and realizing that my own life stories are different, but the same in so many ways. We're all struggling with the same things, and that's what makes it so powerful, to know that other people are feeling the same things and seeing the same things that the rest of humankind pretends that they're not experiencing or seeing, or doesn't.
It was one of the best decisions I've ever made to take this course. I've always thought of lists and calendar planning as really just mapping out other people's urgencies, and therefore it's just so hard to do. The big flip for me was when I realized that those things are about me building a great life for myself, to ensure that I maintain the pillars that support my nervous system, and also as a way to see in that planning that I'm building in time for the things that really matter to me, that help me stay grounded.
Something that I did not expect was just immediately recognizing myself in it literally feels like you're staring in a mirror like for 10 weeks, but in a good way. So I did not expect the community and sort of the outreach and the connection. My biggest takeaway was we're all here learning to support our future selves. And that like still comes to the top of my mind like day to day.
Just the support group around it has been a big game changer for me.
Here at ADHD Rewired, we believe it's not about working harder. It's about learning what works for you and your unique ADHD brain, and working smarter for you so you can live a meaningful, wholehearted, and intentional life. So if this sounds like the group that you need to move forward with the things that are actually important to you, then take that first step by going to coachingrewired.com. Registration is by invitation only, so don't wait. Once you've gone to coachingrewired.com, click on that big purple button at the top of the page to get your name added to our spring interest list. Then once you've confirmed your email, instructions will be sent to you with what you need to complete to join us on Thursday, March 9th at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Level up your ADHD management with people who just get it, and get started at coachingrewired.com. But don't wait, we are filling up. My section only has 1 spot left. Section 5 with Kristen Marks only has 2 spots left. So go check out the website, get your name added to the interest list, and we would love to see you on Thursday. And did you know, if you are in the US, PayPal offers 6 months, 0% interest financing to qualified applicants. So it's a great way to make this an investment on an affordable monthly budget. Come invest in your growth. Growth happens here, and you don't have to do any of this alone. That's coaching, reWired.com. If you like ADHD Rewired and want to hear more ADHD stories and ADHD management strategies, then be sure to check out the other podcasts we have here on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network by going to ADHDrewired.com/podcast network. We also want to thank all of our listeners who tune into this show every week. If you want to support this show, then we'd love it if you left a rating and review in your favorite podcast player, if your podcast app allows. Want to grab the resources mentioned in each show? Then go to ADHDrewired.com/podcast to find episode archives and show notes for each episode. Then, if you want to get more ADHD-friendly solutions to your ADHD-related questions, then go to ADHDrewired.com/events and register so you can join me and the rest of the ADHD Rewired team every second Tuesday of the month on Zoom for our monthly live Q&A. That's every second Tuesday of the month at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. For our next Q&A, we're going to be joined by a special guest panelist, my friend Drew Ackerman, who you might know as Scoots, who's the host of the Sleep With Me podcast. If you've never heard Sleep With Me and you're looking for a strangely wonderful podcast to help you fall asleep, check out Sleep With Me podcast. So join us on March 14th for our next live Q&A with Scoots from Sleep With Me. Whether you want to join us for our live monthly Q&A, need to find show notes to all of our episodes, or want to learn more about our adult study hall community or our award-winning coaching and accountability groups, you can find it all at ADHDrewired.com. That's ADHDrewired.com.
All right, we are back with Ian Siegel. All right, so Ian, before the break, we were kind of talking about some of the experiences you've had professionally working with others, and kind of talking about how you saw your own learning journey, and recognizing, oh, I had some things to learn to help these kinds of learners learn, right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about adults here. So
Sure.
one of the things that, I guess, bringing it back for a moment to my son, because that's where I started learning about giftedness, and I think it was a book or an article that I read a while ago, and that the idea that giftedness is a serious problem, right? And it has this reverse stigma of like the name, like, oh, you're gifted, like, oh, your kid's so gifted, or brag. It's like, actually, I think it's actually a terrible name for what it is, because it's high IQ is one part of giftedness, but it is way more than that. It's just like experiencing everything in this very intense kind of way. And one of the things that I see this with my son, and I see this with other gifted learners, is that when something doesn't come to them right away, then the emotional stuff kicks in. And it's like, my whole life, I was used to having to struggle to learn stuff. And so I've become really good at learning how I learn. Lots of things did not come naturally to me. So let's talk about this. So you got these different kinds of learners, different kinds of brains. How do we help people who have different learning styles actually learn, especially when we're dealing with all the years of school trauma?
Yeah. No, yeah. It's definitely a blessing and a curse, giftedness. And then it becomes, I've noticed, more of a curse the longer you're in school, or you're longer in a place where you're feeling like you need to judge yourself and figure out, like, because at the end of the day, learning happens really fast when there's this kind of unconditional acceptance towards yourself. So yeah, I think, like, I tell that
Wait,
Shin story.
I want to pause on that, because that's actually a really important point. Say that again.
Well, learning comes not when you're stressed or under the gun, but when you unconditionally accept yourself.
I'm just like thinking about what that means, and thinking about listeners sort of integrating that idea, like when we can unconditionally accept ourselves, that's when learning happens. So let's
Yeah.
unpack that a little bit.
When you're in a state of self-judgment, right, that means you are prioritizing what you already know and how you're thinking about the world around you. When you have utter self-acceptance, unconditional, What it does is it creates the kind of neurological environment when a new thing pops in to your, like a stimulus, into your brain picks up on a signal. You're not in a kind of stress state where it feels like it's going to overwhelm you. You're in a kind of calm state, kind of like when you're eating food, right? You want to be in that state while learning because it's like your parasympathetic system really going. By accepting yourself, you calm the nervous system down. It even is true on a neurological level. And this is actually ties into COVID, which is crazy, is that when the brain is inflamed, it produces cytokines. This is like an inflammatory response. And that's healthy when you're in a kind of quiet state because it's kind of like, change the neural connections here. We're good, right? But a lot of people live in a state of where there's cytokine levels, which could be a product of stress from the outside world, internal stress because there's something wrong. You have diabetes or something like that, or you have a heart disease, or, just any kind of chronic anything. So their cytokine levels pretty high. And so any kind of learning experience becomes a reason to shut down or to block out or something. By kind of accepting yourself unconditionally, you can even change that neurochemical situation to a certain extent so that you can bring those levels down. And then you're ready for, to learn.
It kind of makes me think about how, as a coach and in terms of a therapist, we play with words a lot, right? And so, when we hear a client say, this is a problem, say it's a challenge versus a problem. Because a challenge is something you can do about, I was thinking about this idea of when we look at a challenge and even taking that to the next level and saying, this is an opportunity for growth. And I think that when that idea, and I was first introduced to that many years ago, I was like, that's a clever sort of spin on saying the same thing. Yep, this I suck at this. Okay, it's an opportunity for growth. But what I've really over the years, as through practice and as I've grown my business, I've had to confront a lot of things that have been challenging for me. And there
Yeah.
have been things where I'm like, I truly don't know how I'm going to do this. There's these moments where I feel like, am I hitting a ceiling on something here? Or it just felt, and I was like, well, here's a lot of opportunities for growth here. I don't know how I'm going to learn it, but it's important enough to me that I'm going to keep poking at the bear of what I don't understand until I learn it.
Yeah.
And I have found over time that that opportunity for growth idea really feels like a genuine opportunity.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And I think you're basically creating agreements with yourself. I mean, or having these experiences over and over again. And eventually your mindset does change because your experience of overcoming these challenges becomes it's part of who you are. Then you're like, oh, I see myself that way. And then you don't go down the same kind of anxious paths or kind of distracting yourself paths on purpose, is to procrastinate because you're scared of what that might entail. But yeah, I mean, I think it's unfair for coaches, because it's if you really kind of take advantage of it, it's the learning experience really is it's yours. It's unfair because I mean, with Chen, and I've done that ever since. I mean, with parents too, it's just talking to everyone. I'm like, oh, okay, no, the world's a little different than what I thought. And then kind of reconciling that and rearranging and being okay with it. But I think it's kind of a tragedy too that we're talking about this as if this is so different and a big deal, because it's I think in school that doesn't happen. Because I think what you're experiencing, what you're describing is also, it's an intellectual experience. See, you're seeing it some way, you didn't see the problem the other way. You kind of honestly, I don't want to sound too woo-woo, but you're developing a higher consciousness. Einstein says, no problem is solved in the same conscious plane that you start from. You have to go to another level. Again, bringing back to kids, but then I see this with adults too. It's just this where are the intellectual experiences? Where is that before and after happening? It feels so much, we are so focused on memorizing what we already know as a culture.
And it's a
and then
right
judging
and wrong
ourselves.
answer.
Yeah, that's right or wrong answer. It's it's silly. It's really silly. And it's just and if you think about it, if learning, right, and that's what I like about startups and stuff like that, because that's a learning situation. You don't know what's going to happen next. You're trying to put yourself out there and then quickly just learn from that situation. Yeah, it doesn't It doesn't happen that way. And it's beyond just on an individual level. It's also in the sense of like in collaboration with each other. A lot of times when we're opposites, so take the anxious person and then the person with ADHD, they butt heads and they become worse learners instead of like really learning from the other's perspective. I see this in my company, like when we were really having some troubles. This just like, like I have someone in marketing and someone in sales, and they hated each other. I mean, imagine like they got to communicate.
Yeah, that's a tough team to not have on the same page.
Yeah, no, and I just so like two kind of archetypes that come out of like anxiety and ADHD for me are what I call control freaks and escape artists. So I had a control freak, on the sales side, and I had an escape artist on the marketing side. And they're just like defining themselves against each other. You're like, well, this person sucks. And, the way they think about stuff is just so like bad, like the ADHD person, they're getting blamed for just like missing a detail that screws everything up. And then the control freak's getting blamed for like thinking too much in a box and all of that. So I was reading about ancient history in this book called Dawn of Everything. It's an incredible book. It's like really recent. Recently published. This genius guy wrote it and then dropped dead like the week after.
Oh God.
So it took a lot.
He finishes the book, The Dawn of Everything. My work here is done.
Exactly. See you guys. But I learned like a complicated sounding word from this book that I thought was just so on point in terms of how we're failing to learn from each other, which is it's called schismogenesis.
Ooh.
And it's basically that we define ourselves against each other defensively. Just think of like any like rivalry throughout history, like France versus England, and the Native American tribes did that to the nth degree. And it's just that when we're insecure for whatever reason, no self-acceptance, suddenly we go back to like social rules and say like, yeah, you suck, I'm the guy, and I know what's up defensively, and while subconsciously knowing that we're not learning and we're kind of like upset about it, because I think that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're much happier when we are. Yeah, a lot of opportunities like, in the workplace to like shift that. But the way we have to listen to each other to get past those defense things is just requires some real time, I think, to like get people to calm down.
So what do we do about that?
I know it sounds like just right into like a sales pitch for us, but it's like, a world of coaches is a lot better world. One in which that when people learn things, they turn around and they teach the next person, what they just learned. So they can experience what we get to experience. We get all the good stuff, getting to like, and it becomes like too like, now I don't learn much from my students, or anything, because I've like really kind of pull this all together, but I'm still trying, but it's like a 90-10%. It was flipped in Chin's case. I was like, I learned 90%. But I think that like there could be a more even balance if there was just like, that was part of learning as like instituted in companies. And if you look at like some of like the best consulting companies, they have apprenticeships basically. Like, my friend works at Bain. He's like kind of an apprentice of someone else. It's like, and the thing is, it's just that's only reserved for royalty. And not even that, because like the Bain employee, right? Like, oh, we're going to invest in this guy or this woman. I just think that like I have this eye for potential that people have way more potential than they realize.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, actually, we should be doing that at a way greater rate than people even understand.
I don't know if you've ever heard this. It's one of my favorite quotes. It's by Henry Rollins. And it's, if you could see the you that I see when I see you, you would see yourself so differently.
Oh my God. I feel like I say that in different ways to my students all the time. I'm like, I feel like I'm the only one who knows your potential. You're hiding it from yourself. Your parents are like worried, and that's the other thing. When you're an adult and you have kids, it's tough, man, because you have more than blind spots, not just yourself. It's also your kid. And it's the sad because you're worried about them, and you're worried about you, and like you want them to do the right things and you want them to be okay. And you want yourself to be okay. But it's just tough because all that self-judgment does prevent learning. And in addition to like the opposite, like reality could be the case, which is that like, our closest relationships should be our greatest sources of like learning. And a lot of times it is, you start off like you have a baby, you're like, holy cow, like I'm learning a ton, and then your spouse, you're like, I mean, once you stop learning about your spouse, that's like, separation, divorce kind of thing.
Yeah, been there, done that. So,
well, a brilliant person here. So.
So much of learning, especially if, we're not typical learners and have neurodivergent brains, really, it seems like depends on our ability to hold space for uncertainty and ambiguity and not having any idea what the heck we're doing and being able to stay curious in that space. Right?
Absolutely. And that's tough. I mean, because again, that self-judgment stuff starts creeping in those situations a lot for a lot of people. But I think like one thing that could be comforting that I've started to think about is, I know it sounds negative, but like think about an idea that like, in my opinion, as a society, human population, we're not learning that well. So like the conventional kind of like mainstream stuff is pretty much like indoctrination into what we already know. And you do all this stuff and you might be okay kind of stuff, right?
Especially with the way how siloed media is now. Like you'll find
Oh, yeah.
any channel to just echo your own points of view.
Yeah, exactly. So then you start to look at like, in addition, the great thinkers have, they might have had tutors and all that stuff. I think that's a huge piece of it. But almost invariably, I mean, again, we don't know for sure, but a lot of these characters acted like they had serious psychological issues. Think about like that, these psychological issues, including ADHD, they're antisocial ultimately, because you're distracted, you're not present, you're not paying attention to the other person. If you have autism, same deal. If you, if you have bipolar, if you're like any of these things that pretty much everything but anxiety, social anxiety. And again, it still is antisocial because it's not like truly getting, but they're socially focused in that situation. But everything but anxiety, you'll notice those things I named, dyslexia also and all that. This is like what these geniuses all had. It's like as if like their antisocial kind of part of their life was necessary for them to learn. The key is just whether these people can be reintegrated back into society with their new ideas. I mean, look at Elon Musk as a case study, right? Like he goes off and he's like, we need to go to new planets. We got to go to green energy. We got to change the way that, I'm going backwards, and we got to change the way that, we pay people, all that stuff. And good ideas, right? Right now, ironically, someone with, on the autism spectrum is like, a CEO, at least temporarily, for a social media company, and everyone is like going berserk about it. I think that like you have to take the good, and instead we like, as conventional wisdom, mainstream culture, they're focused on like this guy, he's like, look, he's a jackass and all that stuff. And I'm like, okay, sure. But like, what about integrating new ideas and then taking what we can and realizing that these people are like, their brains are working in one way and not in another. And that's it. And just like, flip side for the people who are hyper socially aware and all that. So
looking at society,
kind of like taking
too.
comfort in that. Yeah.
But looking at society, I've been saying for years that, if we look at autism as one of the core social impairments in autism, is that theory of mind, that ability to really see something from somebody else's point of view, to be able to understand that, other people have different opinions and interests and ideas. And not that they're better or worse, that they're just different. And so one of the things I've been thinking for years is like our elected governmental body. It's like they collectively have autism because nobody is listening to each other because we're just shouting that we're right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like no learning is going to ever happen when we were just shouting that we're right.
I really appreciate that framework because I think that's just like, I know because people can take offense, when you call, you're acting autistic kind of like, they're like, well, you don't know what it's like to have autism and all that. So I understand all that. But like, I think that there's a level of kind of a spectrum of like behaviors that people engage in who are not autistic or not this or not that, but are just like they're playing into or like are behaving in a way that aligns with that at some level without having to be this or that. But it's like this behavioral stress response. that's they're trying.
Let's pause for a quick break, and when we come back, well, you know what? I'm just gonna stay curious in this moment and be a learner. I don't know where we're going. We'll come back. You'll have to tune in to find out. So we will be right back. Support for this podcast comes from Adult Study Hall, our online body doubling community at adultstudyhall.com. From our 24/7 drop-in room to our weekly guided and themed sessions, there are plenty of ways that you can get more done and not have to tackle your toughest tasks alone. Membership is only $19.99 a month and it's free to try for the first week. Your membership includes access to Adult Study Hall 24/7 or ASH 24/7, our co-working drop-in rooms open to you all day and night. Then, if you would prefer a verbal check-in with a little bit more structure to stay focused on your writing or laundry or homework, decluttering, cleaning, job searching, whatever it is you might be working on, your membership will also include access to all of our themed and guided sessions that we call Adult Study Hall Plus or ASH Plus. And when you're done with this episode, I'd highly recommend giving episode 403 a listen. I jumped into one of the ASH Plus sessions with ADHD reWired coach Kat Hoyer and got to hear some success stories and experiences from members who were on the hunt for new jobs. It was really inspiring, and I think you'll enjoy it. So what are you waiting for? Boost your productivity while maybe even having a bit of fun by joining our ADHD-friendly body doubling community built just for us at adultstudyhall.com. Working with others who just get it can really make all the difference. In fact, I'm actually recording this right now in Adult Study Hall because I was doing just about everything other than what I needed to be doing. And so when that happens, I log in to Adult Study Hall. That's adultstudyhall.com. I'm looking forward to co-working with you at adultstudyhall.com. Support for this podcast comes from our patrons over at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. I want to thank all of our patrons, new and old, for supporting the work that we do. Perks for our patrons start at just $5 a month, where you can get ad-free episodes of this show. But if you are actually worried that you will miss some updates of things that we are doing here at ADHD Rewired, we are actually trying a little experiment right now where we are putting the ads at the very end of the episode so you can listen to the episode uninterrupted by ads. And if you still want to hear what we're doing here at ADHD Rewired, stay tuned to the very end so you can get those by becoming a patron starting at just $5 a month. But if you're looking for additional support and want a taste of group coaching, then consider becoming a patron at the $25 a month level. And you can join me every fourth Tuesday of the month for our monthly coaching call that we do on Zoom. If you can't make our monthly coaching call or it's not in the budget right now, you can still get the audio recordings of our tips and tricks that we share every month when you become a patron at just $10 a month. To get all of the perks at $25 a month, get ad-free episodes or the ads at the end of the episode instead of in the middle, and those recordings at $10 a month, or the episodes with ads at the end for $5 a month. And while ADHD Rewired is free to listeners, it does come with costs. By becoming a patron at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon, your support not only helps us stay independent and authentic to our stories, you'll also help us cover things like storage, hosting, and editing services, equipment, and everything else we need to help keep this show running smoothly. Truly, your contribution, no matter the amount, goes a long way to help us continue to share our stories every week. So if it's in the cards for you right now and you decide to become a patron, thank you so much. Remember, perks start at just $5 a month and support can start at any amount that makes sense for you at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. Thanks. All right, we are back with Ian Siegel. All right, so as we're talking about learning, and I think one of the through lines that we've been discussing here is the impact of a stressed brain on learning. I think this really comes back to and down to that we are a nation and really a world that is not knowing how to deal with trauma and generational trauma. And I genuinely think that until we learn as a society how to deal with that, we are constantly going to be square pegs in round holes, especially when we are neurodivergent.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know if you've dug into polyvagal theory at all yet. Do you know what I'm talking
You
about?
know, it's funny. So all this stuff was coming up on it, and so I listened to this one book. I think I picked the wrong book because I just like I can stick with most books, even if I'm like, it's all right. Because I'm always like curious, there's going to be a gem in this book somewhere, right? Like I'll get all the way to the end. Just I'm like, okay, I made it this far. I've got to get to the end because there's got to be something. I don't even remember what the book was, but I was like, this isn't really doing anything for me. And then I have not yet seeked another book to learn about it, but I know that there's a lot of stuff that has been coming out over the last couple of years, really about this. So do you want to speak to that?
Oh, I mean, just sure a little bit. Just, I mean, the vagus nerve is like kind of a control center for how activated you are, let's
Mm.
say. And so, like, if you have like a predisposition toward ADHD, and then you throw stress on top, right? Then you're going to act a little bit more like that, or anxiety or whatever. It's going to just start to elevate. It's like kind of it's like a fight or flight response, and like halfway to get me the hell out of here or let me fight is like, anxiety or ADHD or something that's kind of like a modern condition version of that. Part of the strategy of like kind of trying to calm yourself down is to like pay attention to how your body feels and try to like ground yourself by like, because it's like you're kind of in the clouds, like spun up. And so you're trying to find a way to come back to yourself. And in that process, you start to feel like, wow, my body doesn't feel so good, I think. And that, like, I think that our conscious reality is like what we perceive and what we think the world is. This is another part of polyvagal theory, is that it's kind of dictated by like how our body feels, and our brain is picking up those signals. But the thing is that it's low grade enough that you're not like, oh, whoa, yeah, something hurts my side.
It's like sub-threshold stuff where it's like you only notice that it was there when it's removed. Kind of like the mess on my desk. I didn't realize how much it was bothering me until I clear it off, and then I'm like, oh, I could think again.
Exactly. And the thing is that what happens with the human mind is that if you don't know what the cause, you project out. You're like, oh, there's something else that's wrong with the universe around me or my world around me, even though it's just that you feel bad, like, and you're not. And so,
Because feelings are not facts, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like the idea of like, this is where I think meditation and all that and kind of checking and doing body scans can be actually really helpful, because you're like, wait a second, let me just make sure that it's not me that's like making me feel this way, that I'm actually intuiting something and not projecting something. Because the more activated you come, you get elevated, you start to just like push out that bad feeling and assume it's something from the outside. So, I mean, imagine learning from someone else when that's happening. I mean, it's not going to happen.
It's because our brain's doing what it's designed to do, and it's to make sense of the world. And if we don't have all the information, we're going to piece together some story to try to make sense of it.
Exactly. And it's this dual survival mechanism, because at some level, we don't want to be paying attention to our bodies all the time, right? Like, because like for some sub-threshold thing, because then it's like, God, when can we ever like focus on what counts, but beyond that. But then it just keeps on coming till it's like too late. And that's like something that I heard in one of your podcasts about like kind of like sleep and all that. It's like really catching yourself before like you really are really tired and start making really bad decisions and start falling into like those, because same things, lack of sleep, that's going to put, press the stress button and all that too. It's that, like I said, kind of from the beginning, it's that self-care, that kind of self-awareness. And without those, you're really kind of you're in deep water. It's really tough to figure it out from there.
When you're working with students, how much of your time is actually spent working on emotional self-regulation?
I mean, I would say like with the brilliant kids, like half the time I'm like asking these questions that are like more like getting at the heart of like what they're scared of, and yeah, I mean, it's because it's like you get them in the right place. It's like a nudge. Then they're there. It's not about me with some fancy ass explanation. If I have that, they're not remembering shit, because it's too easy. They need to work for it. You know this as a coach and all that, but yeah, I think it's just the nudge, but the nudge only works if they're in the right state in the first place. So it's like, let's get them in the right state. And here's the nudge. Okay. Like, cause I barely have to talk when it comes to the concept. I'm like, well, I like even begin to say something, and this kid's like, oh yeah, blah, 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 blah. And they don't want me to talk. Definitely not.
And the reason I asked this that question is no matter how old you are, if you're looking at something in your life and you're like, I don't know how to do this, I keep trying to do like take a step back from the actual thing you're trying to learn and take a step inward and really look at and feel what you're feeling. And over the last probably 5 or 10 years, emotional self-regulation has been much more of the understanding of ADHD than it had been, even though it was early on in the early days when we called it ADD. Emotional self-regulation was actually part of the diagnostic criteria, but when the social sciences were trying to prove themselves as a real science. Well, emotion's hard to measure, so let's just get rid of that as one of the criteria. Um, but it's been there the whole time, and
Thank you. So I wasn't that deep with it, but I always say this like mistakenly. I'm like, the most important learning disabilities that we need to pay attention to are emotional issues, and then I include ADHD as one of them. But I'm like, oh wait, other people don't really think that, but that's what I think. That's my experience of it. That's you're pressing a stress button that causes, and the whole escape artist mentality that can kind of come out of it, which is just like, it's kind of like being brilliant at the last minute or something like that. It kind of kind of being special in your own way is the escape artist thing, because you're not going to do the kind of control freak, like do it everything by the book and show how you're doing it the right way from the book way. And then it's just like you embrace that, hold on to it so tightly, but it's like, no, you gotta let that go, because it's holding you back from learning it, what you at the pace you really could. But I think overall, I think just accepting that if ADHD is part of it, embrace when you're feeling that way. And maybe that's that antisocial moment where you're gonna learn something away from the crowd. So instead of beating yourself up on top of feeling like you're distracted, which ratchets up your stress even more, be like, oh yeah, this is part of my play. This is what my life is. This is what it's about. And I'm going to have some kind of unique insight that other people don't have. And that's it, and it's a little bit of a struggle. It sucks, but something's good going to come out of it, basically. And having that confidence, I think that can really help you kind of ratchet it down and also entertain these cool ideas and bring them back to the mainstream of society.
Ian Siegel, the website is IAN-Siegel, Siegel.com. We will put a link to that in this episode's show notes. Check out the book, School Sucks, Your Child Doesn't. Could we get t-shirts with that made too? Because that's just an amazing title.
You'll be the first one to get one.
Oh man, that's great. No, I love that. Any final thoughts or any other places that you would like listeners to reach you at?
No, I think that's it. Just you can check me out there. Check out the book on Amazon. And if you want to learn more about your child unlocking their brilliance, I'll be the person to talk to. So check us out at streamlinelearning.com in that case. Thanks so much.
Ian, thanks for learning with us.
Eric, thank you.
This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD reWired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, ADHDrewired.com. If you are a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all the shows on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD rewired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown. The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great, starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD Rewired. Click the button to be a guest at the top of the page and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.